My name is Harper Voss. I'm 32. For 7 years, my family believed I did part-time bookkeeping for a landscaping company on weekends. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in September, my sister slid a folded piece of paper across our father's kitchen table and told me to sign it. It was a statement admitting I had misapplied company funds. $41,000 was missing from the account, and a state auditor was already asking questions. My sister hadn't touched a ledger in 3 years. My father looked at me the way he looks at a bad invoice. "You don't have kids depending on this business, Harper." "She does." My sister didn't even look up from repotting a fern. "Nobody's going to check your math anyway," she said. A notary was already scheduled for 4 o'clock. Before anyone had asked me one real question. What none of them knew about my actual job, about an audit trail already sitting in a state database, and about the accountant who'd quietly flagged our books for 8 months, unraveled this family over the next 5 weeks. Welcome back to Echoes of Betrayal, where quiet people finally tell the stories their families made sure nobody heard. Stay with me. This one has more turns than you expect. I drove 3 hours to Millbrook, Pennsylvania, because my father's 60th birthday was that Sunday, and because I still hadn't learned to say no to an invitation with my name on it. The nursery my parents built 30 years ago sits behind their house. Rows of greenhouses my dad still walks every morning with his coffee. My sister Reese runs the front office now, the register, the deliveries, the parts of the business that photograph well. I used to work there too. Before I moved 2 states away for a job I never fully explained. My family calls it something with numbers. That description has done more work protecting me than any lock on any door ever could. In my parents' hallway, there's a wall of photos from every nursery open. House since 1994, and I'm in maybe 6 of them. The most recent is from a ribbon cutting 8 years ago. After that, the wall just keeps adding Reese, her husband, their kids, a whole second generation growing in frames, while I stayed one photo from a long time ago. My father found me by the coffee station at his birthday lunch and introduced me to a supplier he'd known 20 years. "This is Harper," he said. "She helps out with numbers when we need her." The supplier nodded politely. I shook his hand and let it stand because I always let it stand. Being the quiet one who never corrected the record was the one thing this family ever let me be good at. By the time the cake came out, my sister had already pulled me aside twice about the accounting thing. Always in that breezy voice she uses for anything she doesn't want witnesses to. I didn't understand yet how big the thing actually was. I just knew Reese only gets that tone when she's decided how a conversation is going to end before it starts. The dinner didn't happen the way birthdays usually do. My mother made the roast, Reese's kids ran through the greenhouse rows, and everyone acted normal for exactly as long as it took to clear the plates. Then my mother set a manila folder on the table next to the cake and said, "We need to talk about the business account before you head back." Reese had already pulled out a chair for herself, which told me this had been planned before I arrived. My father cleared his throat the way he does before a number he doesn't like. The state's doing a routine review of small businesses that took pandemic relief funds, he said. Ours got flagged. There's a gap in the deposits going back 3 years. 41,000 give or take. I asked the obvious question. Where did it go? Nobody answered directly. My mother refilled water glasses that didn't need refilling. Reese examined her nails like they'd personally wronged her. I want you to understand how carefully this next part was built. Because it wasn't clumsy, my father said the business couldn't survive an embezzlement finding, that the bank would call the line of credit, that Reese's family depended on this place in a way I supposedly didn't. My mother said family businesses handle these things internally all the time. Reese, finally looking up, said the plan out loud like she was reading a grocery list. I would tell the auditor I'd handled the bookkeeping remotely for years, made errors, moved money without authorization, and that the family had only recently discovered it. A private, forgivable mistake, settled with restitution instead of a fraud referral. You're already the one who does the numbers, she said. Nobody's going to check your math anyway. As if that sentence had ever once been true about me. I told them no. I said it once, evenly, and my father's face did something I'd never seen before. A controlled disappointment usually reserved for late shipments and dead perennials. My mother said, Harper, think about what you're doing to this family. Reese didn't argue. She just checked her phone and said, the notary's coming at 4. I looked around that table, my mother's folder, my father's untouched cake, my sister's face already rearranged into the shape of someone who'd decided this was settled and understood this conversation had never been a request. It had been a scheduling update. Somewhere in town, a woman I'd never met was driving over with a stamp and a blank line waiting for my signature, and my family had booked her before saying a single word to me. My father tried one more angle on his way to answer the door. You don't even work here anymore, Harper. What does it cost you, really? You come back for a weekend, you sign something, you go back to your life. He meant it as reassurance. It landed as an appraisal, the exact dollar value my family assigned to my name. Apparently less than the cost of asking Reese one hard question. I should tell you what happened when I was 24, because it explains the whole wall of photos. I'd just finished a graduate program in accounting and taken a job I was genuinely proud of, and told my family about it at a dinner much like this one. My father asked if it paid better than real work. My mother asked if I'd still help at the nursery during tax season. Unpaid, the way I always had since high school. Reese, 20 then, said the job sounded boring. Everyone laughed, and the subject changed to her wedding before I'd finished my sentence. Nobody asked one follow-up about what the job actually was. I realized that year my family had already decided what shape I was allowed to take in this house, and it wasn't sharp enough to matter. So I stopped correcting the record. When people asked what I did, I let something with numbers stand, because a vague answer never invited a follow-up, and a follow-up always seemed to cost me something I couldn't get back. Here's what none of them knew. I'm a forensic auditor for the State Department of Revenue. I investigate exactly this kind of case. Small businesses that misreport income, skim registers, or launder personal spending through company accounts. I've spent 8 years reading QuickBooks files the way other people read the newspaper. And I'd noticed something wrong with my family's nursery long before that Thursday dinner. Not because I'd gone looking. 18 months earlier, doing a routine cross-reference for an unrelated audit, our nursery's business ID had come up flagged for underreported sales tax, and I recused myself the same day, the way ethics rules require, and quietly told my supervisor I had a family connection. I had no idea yet how deep it went. I only knew I could not sign anything about it, and I could not be the one accused of causing it. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in my old childhood room with my laptop and did the one thing I do better than almost anyone I know. I read. Not their internal books. I had no access and wasn't about to create one. But the public-facing pieces any state auditor's report would eventually pull. Business registration filings, the nursery's sales tax remittance history, public record for licensed vendors in Pennsylvania, court dockets for liens. None of it gave me numbers, but it gave me a timeline, and timelines are where I live. The gap my father described, 3 years, lined up almost exactly with the year Reese took over daily deposits after our old bookkeeper retired. It also lined up with the year Reese and her husband bought a lake house, 40 minutes from Millbrook, a purchase my mother once called such a blessing. Everything just came together for them. I sat with that phrase a long time and wrote it down in a notebook I keep for exactly these moments. Not for the reminder, but because writing a sentence down is the fastest way. I know to stop talking myself out of what I already understand. Monday morning, before I'd even left Millbrook, I did the one thing I could do without touching a single case file myself. I called my agency's ethics office and formally documented in writing that my family had asked me to sign a statement falsely claiming responsibility for a discrepancy under state review, and that I had declined and intended to have no further role beyond being a private citizen and potential witness. My supervisor, Denise Okonkwo, told me exactly what I already suspected. I could not investigate my own family's business, could not access their file, could not so much as suggest a strategy to the auditor assigned to it. But I could, and should, immediately disclose that someone had asked me to submit a false statement to a state reviewer, because attempting to influence an active audit is its own separate problem, one that exists independently of whatever Reese had or hadn't done with the deposits. I drove home that afternoon and did not sign anything. My father called twice. I let both go to voicemail. On Wednesday, the actual assigned auditor, a mild, thorough man named Greg Talbot, called the nursery's landline to schedule an in-person visit. And my mother, in a panic, called me instead of Reese because some old instinct in her still reaches for the responsible one when things go sideways. She asked if I could just be there for the visit, in case they need someone who understands the books. I told her I could not attend in any capacity connected to the business, and I meant it in a way she completely misunderstood. She thought I was still protecting the family. I was actually protecting the case, because the version of events already sitting in a state database, time-stamped, unconnected to Reese's name, could not survive me getting anywhere near that meeting. Greg Talbot's visit happened on a Friday, and I heard about it secondhand, the way I'd hear about most of what came next. He'd asked for 3 years of point of sale, reports alongside the bank statements, a completely standard request that apparently nobody in my family had anticipated, because point-of-sale systems log every transaction with a timestamp and an employee code, and bank deposits log the actual cash that physically arrives. When those two numbers don't match for years at a time, in a business that handles a lot of cash sales, there's really only one story that explains it. Someone is ringing up a sale, taking the cash, and voiding the transaction afterward so the register balances at closing. It's one of the oldest tricks in retail, and it leaves a trail precisely because it has to happen inside the system to work. Reese had been the only person with a manager override code on that register since the year the old bookkeeper retired. My father, I found out later, watched Greg Talbot pull that report on a laptop at their kitchen table and said almost nothing for the rest of the visit. Reese called 9 times in the 4 days after Greg Talbot's visit. I answered on the 10th. Her voice was thinner than at the birthday dinner, without the breezy confidence she wears like a uniform. She didn't apologize. She said the lake house had been a stretch, that her husband's business had a bad year, that she'd meant to pay it back before anyone noticed, that the numbers would even out with one good spring. She said all this like a woman explaining a parking ticket, not 3 years of voiding cash transactions. Then the actual point. "You could still fix this," she said. "Tell them it was a system glitch. They'd believe you. You're the one with credentials." I told her I didn't have the credentials she thought I did, not for this, and that even dressed in technical language, what she was describing was still a crime. She hung up on me the same way our mother used to, mid-sentence, as if the conversation had become inconvenient rather than unfinished. 2 days later, my mother called instead, softer, aimed at a different door. She reminded me of every summer watering flats of impatience as a teenager, every Christmas restocking the gift shop, every ounce of unpaid labor I'd handed this family before college. "You built this place too, Harper," she said. "Don't let it fall apart over pride." I sat with that word pride. It wasn't pride keeping me from signing anything. It was the plain fact that I'd spent 8 years building a career specifically so nobody could ever again ask me to disappear into a story that wasn't mine, and I wasn't handing that back over a lake house I'd never even seen. My father never called at all, which told me more than either call I did get. He handles conflict by tending something with his hands, and I imagined him walking the greenhouse rows that week, checking soil moisture on plants that couldn't answer him back either. I found out later from Reese herself that he had asked her directly, alone, without my mother in the room, whether the money was real. Not whether the audit was a misunderstanding. Whether the money was real. She told him yes. He didn't yell. He nodded once and went back outside. And that was the entire conversation. 40 years of building something together, compressed into 11 words and a closed door. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, Greg Talbot's office sent a certified letter to the business address. I never saw it directly, but Reese described it later in a voice with all the breeze finally gone out of it. Based on the pattern in the point-of-sale reconciliation, the state was referring the matter to its criminal tax fraud unit, and Reese, as the employee with sole override access during the period in question, would be contacted separately for an interview. Nobody's name had been added by me. Nobody needed to add it. The register had been keeping better records than any of us for 3 straight years, and it had never once needed my signature to tell the truth. Reese was charged in December with theft by deception and filing, fraudulent tax returns, both third-degree felonies under Pennsylvania law. She took a plea in March, restitution of the full amount plus penalties, 5 years probation, no jail time, largely because she had no prior record and because Greg Talbot's report was airtight, enough that fighting it would have cost her more than settling. She sold her share of the lake house that spring to cover part of the restitution. She still works at the nursery, though my father moved daily deposits to a system that requires 2 authorized signatures now, a change he made without ever once discussing it with either of us out loud. My mother has never apologized to me directly. What she has done in the 2 years since is stop asking what I do for a living, which from her is its own kind of concession, the closest thing to an acknowledgement I think I'm ever going to get. I want to be honest about the part that surprised me most. It wasn't the audit or the plea, or even Reese's phone call asking me to falsify a report. It was how quiet the ending was. No dramatic confrontation, no scene at a hearing where anyone said my job title out loud in a room full of people who gasped. Just a certified letter, a register that had been telling the truth the whole time, and a family slowly rearranging itself around a fact none of them could argue with. My father still calls me sometimes now, actual calls, not just messages relayed through my mother. And last spring he asked almost shyly whether I'd want to look over the nursery's new accounting software before they switched systems. I said yes, not because I owe them anything, because for the first time in 8 years, he asked instead of assumed. Reese and I don't talk much, but we talk. Last Thanksgiving, she asked me quietly, in the kitchen while our mother carved the turkey, whether I'd ever forgiven her. I told her the truth, which is that forgiveness was never really the question I was working through. What I'd needed wasn't an apology. It was the simple fact of not being asked to lie again. And once that stopped being on the table, something in me finally exhaled that had been holding its breath since I was 24 years old, standing in a kitchen very much like that one, watching a family decide what shape I was allowed to take. That's my story. One manila folder, one register that never lied, and one signature I never gave. If your family has ever asked you to be the version of yourself that's most convenient for them, hear me. You don't owe anyone a false confession just because you're the one who knows how to write one that sounds believable. If this stayed with you, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe. Because next week, I'm telling you what happened when my father finally asked me to teach him what I actually do for a living.